What's up, everyone? I'm Ruthina Porterfield, and this is Liberated Conversations with Ruthina. I am so excited, as you can see, my featured guest for today. Her name is Sandrine Etienne. I am really excited because today we are going to be talking about an issue that is so close to my heart because I have experienced it myself. Right now, I have two aunts that are experiencing it as well. And more than likely, you have someone who's experiencing it, if not you yourself. Today, we're going to be talking about caregiving. It is an issue that is not talked about often enough. It is the reason why I started Liberated Conversations, because it is an experience that occurs and happens with many of us, but it is not discussed nearly enough. So we're going to talk about it today with an excellent social worker out of New York that has experience in this area, as well as some other things. You guys join the conversation. Hello, Sandrine. Thank you for coming and joining me for this.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on here.
Yes, I am excited to have you. First, I want to give a shout out to the Black Podcast Collective for kind of hooking us up.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
we never would have met otherwise.
Never would have met otherwise. It is a great example of Black owned businesses helping others kind of develop their brand and kind of make it big for each of us. So I'm excited. So thank you to Black Pod Collective. So first, I want to, that establishes our connection, but I want you to kind of talk about your experience. I know you're out of New York. Um, Tell me how you got into social work and how you got into your specialty, because social work is so broad. It is so broad.
It really is, really and truly.
Yeah.
So I started out in the field about 17 or so years ago.
Okay.
And what started it was me being working in a nursing home where I feel like I grew up there because my mom worked there for about 30 years. And with that, I was always around the elderly population, their caregivers, and I wanted to be in school for psychology. I was thinking, oh, I want to be a psychologist, but then I was like, that's just too much school. So then fast forward to me linking up with the social worker that worked at the nursing home where my mom was at, and I was like, oh, I like this. I get to talk to people, I get to help people. And I always thought I'd be in the nursing home always. But as I started my career, I always specialized in the health care space. And I just pretty much got a really great position working in home care. And that is where I go out into the community and I actually see people in their home. And I work with not just the clients, but I also work with the caregivers as well. Ooh, I can't hear you.
Can't hear me. Can
There
you
you
hear
go.
me now? There we
Yes.
go. Okay. How I became we hear about social workers growing up all the time, particularly if you grew up in the hood, no matter if it's the North, New York and all of that stuff, or the South, you hear about social work and you usually attribute it to kids, right? You don't think about it when it comes to adults until you have to meet one. And so the first time I met one specifically for me was as a caregiver when I turned 16 and had to take care of my mom. And I had no idea the scope of the responsibilities of a caregiver. So I want you to kind of explain that scope in the area that you cover, you know?
As far as caregiving is concerned, just to clarify.
Caregiver, working with the elderly, that kind of,
Sure.
yeah.
So in my current work, I basically see folks that have been recently discharged from a hospital or rehab
Okay.
setting, and they're pretty much dealing with chronic debilitating illness. Many of them are older, and kind of like what has happened is that they're literally thrown into a position of not being who they once were just all of a sudden, and they're having to deal with family members rather are having to deal with taking care of their loved one, and there was no handbook or no guidebook that prepared them for this ever.
No, there wasn't. It was, you're just kind of thrust into this responsibility. I think, and you can correct me with if I'm wrong, just with experience. I feel like caregiving is one of those things that no one asks for and no one expects, but you take it on and you take everything that comes with it along with what it does to you as well. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I feel like too you get to a point, especially if you're a person of color,
Yeah.
especially for a lot of us in Black communities, it's expected of us.
Yes, the expectation. There is an expectation that when you get older, you're going to take care. I mean, it's not even just, and it's a spoken expectation sometimes where when you get older, I'm going to come and you're going to take care of me, and that's how this is going to work. But I don't think anyone really understand what that looks like. And I don't, and for me personally, it didn't happen as in my mother got older. For me, it was an completely unexpected because it was an accident. It was a car accident that completely took her memory. It is something that I talk about in my book coming out next year, where it was spring break. She got in an accident. The car flipped 3 times and she was thrown out of the back of the car. Um, the thing is, and I didn't realize this until I got older, understanding that I've been a caregiver since day one, because my mother had epilepsy before the accident. So I have very clear memories of waking up because I hear the noise of her having grand mal seizures and going in and knowing the process of how to wait it out, all of the medical procedures that I had to learn from someone else in taking care of her, because at that time, no one really taught you. Again, it was an expectation. She's a single mom. You're her daughter. You live in the house. This is what you do. It was an expectation. And so when the accident happened, it wasn't even a spoken it was just, this is what's going to happen. There's no one else to do it. So it's on you. And my first interaction with the social worker was the day of her release. And I'm wondering if this is how it works for you. The first interaction I had was the day of her release after being in the hospital for 2 months. And I go into an office, I sit down with a social worker. She is of course in shock because it's a 16-year-old sitting with her and not anyone else. And we talk about care and all of that stuff. And then she says that another social worker is going to come to the house. Is that how it usually works? There's someone in the hospital and then someone, as I've seen on your social media post, in the field?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So basically what happens is I say this, I feel like there's different aspects in our lives where you may need a social worker. It's not always a bad thing. A lot of people, unfortunately, we have a
Yeah,
stigma
this
in the
is so
social work
true.
world
So true.
that we're
So
bad
true.
people and we only work with kids and we take away kids from people's homes.
So true.
Not true. Okay. But basically there are hospital social workers. So that is one piece. There's also hospitals in skilled nursing care facilities, which is also another place where someone can be discharged and then go home. And I myself, I only see people in the home. So I work for a home care agency that is part of a bigger hospital care, a healthcare system.
Okay.
And what
Okay.
we do is, so usually there's a nurse that comes out and does the visit initially, opens up the case, and then she or he will assess to see what needs are going on in the home that perhaps they could benefit from a visit from a social worker, and that's where I myself come in.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk about, I want people to understand exactly what caregiving is, because I don't think that people realize that there's a term for what they're doing. And
Yes.
because they don't realize that there's a term for what they're doing, they don't realize the care that they need as a result of what they're doing. So let's kind of establish exactly what caregiving is. So,
So for me, caregiving is there's so many different levels of it, so many
so true.
forms of it. And you don't necessarily have to live with your loved one to be considered a caregiver.
So true.
Yeah,
So
many people are caregivers. I call them being caregivers on the outside, like they're maybe not in the geographical area, but they're still doing caregiving things like, paying bills online, making sure certain things are in place as far as like maybe grocery deliver, like that's becoming more and
mhm.
more popular. You have people that perhaps live in the home who do all of the day-to-day activities of helping their loved one with their activities of daily living,
Right,
taking them
right.
to medical appointments, maybe even coordinating all of those appointments, maybe coordinating certain levels of care, whether it be making sure that if they need a home care aide, maybe they have made arrangements to have an aide come in and they're taking
Yeah,
care of those kinds of needs. I mean, you could also have a loved one at home and be a caregiver and work full time. That is very valid and not necessarily working from home. Although many of us now are working from home, but not everybody. That's not
because
the
of
reality for
COVID, right?
everybody.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's so many different levels and forms of caregiving, and now like what you were saying about your experience being a younger person, a child, really, you were a child when you
Yeah.
were thrown into caregiving,
Yeah.
which does happen a lot, and we're seeing that more and more. And even though I've been doing home care for about 14 years, but 17 years as a whole as a social worker, but for the
Okay.
past 14 years I've noticed a transition where my clients are getting younger and younger. And that
Mm,
is really, truly, there is a huge increase in the number of younger caregivers.
yeah. Yeah. The generational difference is almost staggering. Um, I, I think I told you in our pre-interview, our phone conversation, when it happened, when I was thrown into caregiving, it wasn't even just my mother. At that point, my grandfather had gotten sick, and I was taking care of him as well, where I had to move her from the home that I knew. So you can imagine that effect on a child, a teenager.
Absolutely.
So moving her to the home that she knew, because again, she had lost her memory. She had no memory of me at all. But she knew her father, which was my grandfather.
Mm.
And so the most practical, sensible thing to do was to move her back into the home that she knew, that she grew up in, and into the home with the father that she knew. So you're talking about a Gen X, a very young Gen X at that time, taking care of a baby boomer and the unnamed generation right above her. And so it was, it was, it was definitely an experience. But I'm so glad you talked about the spectrum, because I went from in home care with her and my grandfather, everything from ensuring that she got to doctor's appointments. You got to remember, I was 16. So what? I had my driver's license, a year?
Wow.
So,
Wow.
so I'm driving him and her to doctor's appointments and all those things, to feeding her through a tube, because they released her and she still had the tube in her stomach. And I remember the nurse trying to teach me, and she just kept saying, "How are you going to do this? How are you going to do this?" And because she was thinking about school and everything with me. And so in home, feeding through the tubes, fixing just everything, full on hands on care, dealing with physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists, giving my grandfather just shots and all kinds of stuff. And then, of course, it graduated to me going to school and going to college, and the long distance. It's just exactly what you said, the geographic difference. The responsibilities change, but the role is still the same,
Oh, it's totally, totally.
right? right? And so, and I think it probably looks more like that for older caregivers. Is that correct?
Right, right, right.
So, so that's what happened with me, and then it eventually kind of transitioned to my aunt, who was doing a lot of the caregiving as well, assistance, and she took over some of the responsibilities. I want to address the things that I was not made aware of and that I didn't have any access to, and that was the support.
Mm.
Granted, this was decades ago, a couple decades ago. And it definitely, not that it's even talked about like it should be now, but it definitely wasn't talked about then. But no one talked to me about all of the emotions that came with doing what I was doing. No one, and this I give credit to the social worker that I had at that time.
Mm.
She definitely recognized that it was having some type of effect on me, but I could clearly see that she didn't feel like she had the tools to deal with that. So how do you now in 2020 handle a situation like that?
First of all, the first thing I always ask my caregivers that I'm working with, how are you doing?
Mm,
And they're like, many of them look at
yes,
me like, why are you asking about me? You're here for
my
my mom, my
response.
dad, my uncle, my aunt, my neighbor, whoever it may be. And they're so surprised. And I'm like, well, I'm also here for you. Like, I need to know how
Right.
you're doing. Like, let's do a check in. And how are things going with you? Are you keeping up with your appointments? Have you been to the doctor recently? How are you doing with your medications? Have you thought of maybe speaking to someone about all of the challenges
Yeah.
that caregiving brings? And unfortunately, there's a lot of shame. And that's something that I still deal with so much.
Could you delve into that a little bit? The shame, yeah, kind of,
Sure.
yeah, delve into that a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So for me, I think what it is there's this idea that I shouldn't have to ask for help. I
Oh
again
yeah,
kind of going back to like
right.
what we were talking about before, which is caregiving is just what is expected of you. So me asking for help means like there's something wrong with me. And unfortunately, a lot of us, especially in our Black communities, although I love our people, I do. However, we have this idea that we always have to show up and be the strong person and do all the things, and it's wrong to ask for help when
That
it's
is
okay to
so
ask for
true.
help. It's okay to like it is okay. You can ask for help. And I'm not saying that the help will just snap your fingers and help is going to appear. No. However, if you share with someone what you're going through, you'd be so surprised the insight and information and even resources that may be available to you that you may not even be aware of. And someone
Yes.
may be able to identify with
Yes.
you and give you that support that you needed. Maybe something such as not being able to pick up a medication is something that
Yeah.
you cannot do, and it's okay. And it's okay to ask for help. Like there might be someone in your life that you could depend on to do that for you.
Yeah. Those day-to-day tasks
Yeah.
are taxing
Yes, it
on
is.
you.
It is.
And you're trying to do all of this stuff for this person that you're caring for, and a lot of times you neglect yourself in that. And I wanted you to kind of explain a little bit about the shame, because there is this, yes, particularly in the Black community, where this, because it's such an expectation, it's this thing where you feel like you're selfish, like you're being selfish, and you should be glad you're doing this. A lot of what I got was, your mom gave birth to you, and your mama did this, and your mama did that. So be happy to do this. And it's like,
She'd be
look,
so proud to see you now. She'd be so
yes,
proud. Yep. Oh yeah. Yep.
oh my gosh, yes. And I'm like, well, I'm not proud of me right now. So does that matter? Does it matter that I'm not proud of me?
It does matter. 100%. It's what I always say, like for me, one of my sayings is you're constantly the punching bag. Like you're constantly being beat up because it's like you try to do two steps forward and then you're like two steps back because maybe your loved one is not in the mood one day and they take out all their anger and frustration at you, or something didn't go right when you called a provider, or maybe an authorization for
Yes.
something didn't go through, or you forgot to do something. All these are normal things that we have to remember that we're human and it's
Yeah.
okay. Like stuff happens, and I can even give you, and I know we're going a little bit off topic, but I have
No,
to
it's
explain
fine. It's
this
fine.
experience for me today. So I
Okay.
take care of I'm the sole caregiver for my 76-year-old mother. I'm saying grandmother. Oh boy, my 76-year-old mother. And today, a couple days ago, I had made an appointment for her to have a dental appointment for surgical clearance or whatever. And they called me to remind me that I never sent them the information for the insurance. Totally forgot. They told me this. They sent me an email. I just
Mm,
forgot. I literally forgot. And she told me, please call me before 5 o'clock because the appointment's on Monday. Totally missed my brain. I don't know what happened. It just happened. But you know what? I
yeah.
can't beat myself up over it. I'm just gonna deal with it on Monday. And it is what it is. That's really what it is. And sometimes I think you have to give yourself that permission to say those things. And I think it's okay. And I know you may not feel that way as a caregiver, but I'm telling you, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay. You
It's so difficult. I'm so yeah, those days where you feel like you didn't measure up, where you feel like you didn't do your job, where you feel like you really messed up, and because you messed up, they're messed up. I know I went through that a lot, where there were, oh god, where there were questions, and again, the grunt of it, I was so young, and so I always, as I've gotten older, I'm able to definitely give myself wiggle room and forgive myself for things that I really didn't need to forgive myself for because I was so young. But just feeling like I didn't know enough, I couldn't do enough, I am not enough. And these are all things that build on top of each other.
Mhm.
And those hard days, and it depends, of course, on what exactly you're caring for, right? For me, I was caring for a permanently brain damaged woman who had lost her memory, along with a cancer patient, until he died, right? I have two aunts. One aunt is dealing with a husband who has Alzheimer's. The
Mhm.
other aunt is dealing with my stepfather, who his leg was amputated, and now he's going through some infections and all kinds of other stuff, depression, just all kinds of things that come along with that. And so all of that stuff comes with different symptoms, different reactions. And then I think what people don't realize is that they're not just a patient, they're a person, right? So they're in there. They're they're in there somewhere. And I think that was the
Mm.
difficult piece for me, Sandrine, was I my mother was in, like, looking at the face of my mother,
Mm.
but it just, the person was not, it was just this weird dynamic. And so those really tough days, like when you say, they flare up, they go crazy. I just talked with one of my aunts who had a really difficult, or has been having some really difficult days, with my stepfather. And I think that conversation with her was very, very indicative of what the Black community deals with.
Mm.
She couldn't even really talk, she wouldn't talk about her feelings
Mhm.
about it.
Mhm.
She just said what was going on. And before she could get emotional, before she could show any signs of vulnerability, and I'm such a witness to this because I've done it myself, before she could express how she was feeling, she just got quiet and said, okay, I'm gonna go. And she got off the phone.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, and again, she's a different generation. She's the baby boomer generation, but it is this stigma of, but I can't complain, I have to do it
Right.
because who else is going to do it?
Right.
um what are, and it's so, what have you seen, because you've said that you've seen the caregivers getting younger,
Mhm.
but I'm sure you're seeing caregivers of different generations
Oh,
all
absolutely.
okay.
All the time.
So what are you seeing differences in the responses, in the ways of handling it across generations?
Um, I feel like a lot of it is the same, as in there's a lot of shame to ask for help. That is a big issue. I explain that, it's okay to ask for help. And people sometimes just feel so frustrated because, again, they're like literally between a rock and a hard place. Like, no matter what you do, there is some sort of challenge that hinders you from getting the help that you need. A big issue is that, unfortunately, our society doesn't value taking care of someone in that way. And there's so many restrictions, like you
Yeah,
have to make a certain income to require, I'm sorry, to obtain certain help. You have to require some sort of income in order to get specific kinds of help, or you
right.
have to have lots of money just somewhere in an account somewhere that's just, I guess, I don't know,
Yeah.
money that you just have forever and ever to just spend to take care of your loved one. But it's caregiving is expensive.
Yes,
And
it is.
yeah, it really is. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, a lot of us, we can't afford it. We're like between a rock and a hard place. And something as simple as not being able to get authorization for an appointment that your loved one needed could just be such a turning point for you, where you're just like, you know what, I'm about to give up. I'm just gonna give up because
I'm
this is
done.
so frustrating. I've been working on this for X amount of time. Nothing happened. It's really a lot, and I see it a lot. And I even having gone through it with my mom and having my own challenges, like within our healthcare system. It's extremely frustrating. It really is.
Yeah, it's super frustrating. It's one of those things where I loved when you said, you feel like you take a step forward and you're thrown through two steps back. I want to say that part of the issue also for me is that I don't feel like enough information is provided to the caregiver for what they need. Now, part of it is we don't know the questions to ask.
I know.
But
Yeah.
because we don't know the questions to ask, shouldn't the information be provided? Like I will, for example, I remember having to get medication for my mother, and I didn't know that the refills that I thought I had to call every single month to get the refills for every single month. And I remember calling every single month. And then the third month when I called, the the attack that I got from the office
Mm.
about calling every single month. And I'm like, well, she needs the medicine. What am I supposed to do? And then they explained that no, she has this many refills. Go and get it. And again, that was a simple task, but I was young at that time. I can I can remember that's minimal. Here's extreme. Not being completely clear on what a medication does. And I remember my mother was having real bad problems. I'm so glad I put this in the book. Really bad temper, really violent outbursts that just came just out of nowhere. And I remember explaining the situation to the doctor, and the doctor prescribed her with something. But what they prescribed her with made it worse. And I didn't know how to address it with the doctor because, in your mind, well, you're the doctor,
Mm.
and like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say here. And the only reason I actually did address it was because it got so bad that it was a dangerous situation. It got to a very dangerous situation for me. And so I had to call and say what's going on. And thankfully, I got a different doctor that recognized this is crazy. I don't know why they gave you this medicine. Like, so situations like that where you feel helpless
Right.
and you feel like I should have known. Maybe I could have spoken up. What could I have done? And I wonder which kind of leads into the next kind of conversation that I wanted to have in regards to resources for caregivers. And we'll definitely talk about the financial resources that may be available, but I really want to touch on um, the mental help and the emotional support, because of course that is a whole other conversation within the Black community.
Yes.
um, that whole idea of mental health, but specifically for caregivers, how do we, thankfully you're a good social worker that asks how are you, but how do we as caregivers seek out the resources? Is there a plan that we should be kind of establishing or something like that? What's kind of the best course of action when it comes to that?
I think for me, and I struggle with my fellow medical providers a lot because I feel like a
Sure.
lot of people just doesn't talk to people. There's a severe lack of communication. It's across the board. I personally see it that way. And even for myself, like, and it's so interesting because I feel like I wasn't able to see it until I had to experience it myself with my mom and
Mm,
being thrown into caregiving as well.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's that the lack of communication that the hospital even did, where they
You
they were
know,
like, "Okay, your mom's ready to come home. You gotta come pick her up today." And I was like, "Wait, excuse me? You have to give me a 48-hour notice and this and that." And they're like, "Well,
hello.
who are you? Where do you work?" Like, they automatically know that I'm a healthcare worker because I said certain things. But I think at the end of the day, what we can do for ourselves and for our people and our loved ones is really any question that comes to mind. Think of it like a brain dump. If there is some sort of question that comes to mind that you're thinking of, write it down. Just write it
Mm,
down. I don't whatever it is, it may sound
yes,
crazy to you, write it down. Just it's okay. Just write it down. And think about it that way. And then kind of like
so
if you're in a
true.
hospital situation, say to someone at the hospital, "Look, I have questions about my loved one's care. Can I sit with someone for a few minutes?" They may not be super receptive to that all the time. But if you ask them in a nice way and you really like just say, "Look, I'm very concerned about XYZ. I need to speak to someone." You should be able to speak to someone. I mean, if you don't, then you obviously would have to take it to the next level and speak to a
Right.
supervisor, but you really should be able to set aside some a provider should be able to set aside some time to answer some of your concerns. And I think that is what is missing a lot. And if I hadn't
So
said
true.
some of the things that I said when I was just called and said, I mean, I was at work and they're like, "Oh, you got to come pick up your mom." And I'm like, "Excuse me? You didn't give me any preparation." And I hear this all the time from my family members like that tell me that my clients that I'm working with. And I get it because it happened to me. And then it's
Yeah,
really there's just no communication. And same thing in the home setting. If you have people coming to your home, ask questions. I empower my clients to ask questions all the
it's so
time.
important.
Even the doctors, like if you have a doctor's appointment coming up, write down those questions and you call the receptionist or the medical assistant, whoever answers the phone before that appointment, and you say, "Look, I need you to know that I have questions for the doctor. I need to set aside a few minutes of their time to speak with me," because a lot of these appointments are rushed, and by the time you get there you're just like so overwhelmed. Maybe your loved one wasn't feeling it that day, didn't even want to go to the doctor, and
Right,
you
right.
are just so like just tried and just frustrated. You know
Yeah,
what, if you have like some sort of a plan, like where you write it down beforehand, I think that personally helps. And a lot of the work that I do is empowering my clients to do
I
something
love
simple
that.
like that. It really does help.
That's huge. That's huge because you know what that does? It combats the helplessness that we
Yes.
feel as caregivers.
Yes.
Empowerment completely combats helplessness. And when you do that, it kind of it sets a whole new stage
Oh, totally.
for whatever you have to do for that day.
And I
Right.
also feel like when you uh have that ability to advocate for yourself with providers, they respect you more. And they're
Yeah.
not going to just give you a piece of paper. That is one of my pet peeves is Many providers, they love to just give a piece of paper. I'm like, no, you can't do that. I give papers, but I actually write down actionable things. And I have this whole thing where I think of it like an educational lesson.
Mhm.
And I say, look, these are some of the things I want you to think about. These are some of the things that we address during the visit. This is who you call for this. This is who you call for that. Like, I
Oh my
literally go
gosh.
through a step by step. That's just me. That's just how I
Girl,
feel it works.
look, Cedrine, I'm telling you, you are like, it's like you read my book. Like, because there's a whole chapter that I almost titled The Big Brown Envelope,
Oh my goodness.
because there I remember I told you I sat down in an office
Yes.
with a social worker, and there were just so many papers. I
Oh.
mean, and all I got was, okay, so this is the paper for this particular care, and this is the paper for this particular therapist, and this is, like, she was just going through a list, a checklist that she had to go through, and just kind of handing me all these papers. And then when I tell you, I remember clear as day. I remember clear as day. I can see her taking the envelope and taking the stacks of papers and doing, that with the papers, and putting it in the envelope and saying, just make sure you hold on to this and don't lose any of these papers, because you're going to have to go back to this stuff.
Oh my gosh.
And that's what I walked out with.
Yeah.
And that was it.
When do you have time to to read it? I mean, really?
Like,
In the bathroom, maybe?
like, really, really.
Yeah.
And I'm about to take this woman home to a cancer patient that's waiting for me. It was just, it was so impersonal, yes, but I feel like that's not the word I'm looking for, because I felt almost like just another task in her day.
I was gonna say, for me, I feel like that creates some sort of a disconnect.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah. Yeah. And you feel like that almost begins that whole feeling of there's no one to turn to.
Right.
There's
Right.
no one
Oh,
to talk to about it.
yeah. Yeah.
That's that and that's not cool because
No, it's not.
if that is the foundation, if that's how you're beginning the caregiving experience,
Oh,
it just yeah, it wasn't great.
yeah.
Put it that way.
Oh,
Um, like I said, I got a different social worker for in-home care, and she was definitely different, just a little ill-equipped for this particular situation. I have a question. Just thinking back on my situation, when you see younger caregivers that are minors,
mhm.
is that something that's supposed to be reported?
Yes, I believe so.
Really?
I was gonna say, I your experience is definitely unique. Um, because in my experience, I've never had to report something like that. I've reported things, but not something like that. If we have knowledge that there's a 16-year-old, or a minor, basically, we have to find out if there's some other additional supports. Like, that's not okay for
Okay.
us. I mean, that's not okay to have a 16-year-old be a caregiver. I mean, sometimes a 20-year-old is not equipped because of the lack of support, but they're not considered a minor.
Right,
But I
right.
think it's just important to, like, identify the key people in that person's life who could be available if there's an emergency. I mean, that's a lot to put on a 16-year-old.
Yeah, I remember them kind of asking if anyone was going to help, and I knew that my mother's sister would kind of be in once a week.
Mm,
That's about
right.
what I got. She came in once a week, maybe twice a week or so. I remember, and I write all about this, her coming in every Sunday.
Mhm.
Those were always kind of difficult visits
Mm,
because they were, and this goes back to the conversation about the expectation.
right.
Um, they were visits that were meant to be helpful, but usually turned into critiques.
I hear that all the time. We could have a whole nother topic about this. Okay. The uninvolved caregiver. Yes. I said it.
Oh,
I
wow,
said it.
you really did.
I said it. The uninvolved the people that love to blah 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 when they're not involved. I mean, it's a real thing. I don't even know if they can consider themselves. Well, your case is different, but many times I get the whole, they don't even help me to do anything. They don't pay the bills. They don't do this. They don't do that. And it just, oh my goodness. A lot of stuff gets unpacked in my visits
I'm
where I'm like,
sure.
let's get you connected with a therapist.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I think that's probably, I don't know why she didn't even think to do that. That particular social worker. I think she was just, and I talk about it so
Yeah.
much about the look. I remember the look on her face, sitting in the home and her asking me questions about what my life was like before my mother's accident. And when she heard, because, before my mother's accident, I was college bound,
Yeah, right. Right
probably.
between.
I live in LA now,
Right.
but the goal, I was going to end up out here at some point. You know what I mean? There were just some other aspirations. And she said, well, I remember her going, so what are you going to do now?
Wow.
And it's like, I don't know. I'm just trying to get through the day. Like, I don't know. I
Right.
can't think that
Like,
way.
I didn't really have a plan for this, you
Like,
know?
yeah, there's no, but you're so right. Like I said, I don't, with that particular situation, as far as someone coming in, I remember she would come in, and I don't want to take away from, and this is the shame, and I feel it. I
Mm,
feel it
mm.
when I'm trying to say what I want to say.
Right, right, right.
But okay, so I want to say I don't want to take away from what she did. That's what
Right,
I
right.
want to
I get
say.
it. I understand. I get it. I get it. I get it. Because there were
But
certain things maybe you could lean on for her to do.
well, I knew every Sunday she was coming and I didn't have to cook. Like that was a huge deal for me. That
Yeah,
was
see?
huge
Mhm.
to know that I did not have to cook a Sunday dinner for this man who was born in 1917 and was used to a spread from his. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
I remember cooking meals for him and him just looking like, what is this? Like, I'm like, darn, I'm 16. I didn't
Aw.
even have a chance to learn everything y'all were supposed
Right,
to teach me.
right.
Um, but like I I remember, like you said, that whole you're not doing this right, you're not doing that right. I got a lot of that. I remember trying to, because a part of caregiving for me was managing the bills. I was
Oh,
managing the bills
yeah.
for two households. Remember, I moved my mother out of her house, but that doesn't mean the light bill still need to be paid. The All the utilities needed to be paid. It still needed to be cleaned. It's still like all of that still needed to be done. And so I was managing that and this household. And I remember this aunt seeing what I was doing and her telling me, you have too much money going out. Like you're not, this is how you do, this is not going to work. And I'm like, I know how to do math. Like I
Wow.
may not be in like have my diploma yet, but I do know that 12 minus 10 is 2. Like I don't
Yeah.
like so it was, yeah, you're right. That is a whole other conversation when it comes to the uninvolved caregiver or the critiquing
Oh,
caregiver who
yes.
adds
Mhm.
to the
Yes,
stress.
yes, yes, yes.
It's
Always
it
have something to say with their
Yeah,
input. They mean well, they really
they
do.
do.
And
They
that's the
do.
thing, and you don't wanna take away from them. However, it's
Yeah.
very frustrating, especially when they're not there day in, day out to see what goes
Yeah.
on. It puts such a negative, feeling for the person who's doing all the work. That's why I try to empower people to also think about the people that they can rely on in their loved one's life to do certain things like paying the bills, because that's too much, and I'm hearing you talking about paying the bills, managing 2 households, doing all the caregiving stuff, doing the transportation. You haven't even mentioned schoolwork. You haven't even You're 16. You
Oh,
haven't
yeah.
even mentioned, like, a social life. Like, you know how many
Yeah.
I have clients who feel guilty about wanting to have a social life. I mean, you're supposed to do those things. I mean,
Yeah.
high school, college, any point in your life, you don't even need to be like a young person or old.
Right.
You
Right.
wanted to go to the movies. I mean, pre-COVID, obviously. You
Yeah.
wanted to go to the movies and go to a Broadway show and all the things and
And you know what, Sandrine, I will say this, and this is the one thing I feel like I do have expertise on, the whole idea of when you say knowing who you can lean on, um, know who your friends are as well. Because for me, what got me through was a friend who's actually still my friend to this day. I just talked to her yesterday, from high school, and she made it almost like her mission to ensure that at least once a week I remembered that I was a senior in high school.
Wow.
So she constantly called and said, okay, we're going to see this movie. Okay, we're going to the mall. Okay, we're going. You need that friend who is not afraid to tell you, I don't care what you say, you're going. That friend that can look at you and recognize that you need a break,
Absolutely.
and they're willing to provide that break in whatever way that looks like.
Right. And that's why I say, like, think about any, not just family members, but anyone in your life really that you could count on to help you
Yeah.
to do certain things. It makes such a huge difference. Even just
Yeah.
someone to talk to every once in a while. It doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
family member. It could be a friend. It could be a colleague. It could be, you know, a, a church friend,
Right.
your church
Right.
family.
Someone you can talk to, no judgment.
Right, exactly. That's what it is. No judgment. Like let you just let it all out.
Yeah. 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 So, because I have a stickler rule about
Oh,
ensuring
please.
that we stay within a
Yes, yes,
certain
yes.
time
Go
limit.
ahead. Go ahead.
So I want to address, like I promised, the financial resources.
Yes,
How do you tap into that? Because of course you're in New York. So everything I'm sure differs from state to state,
it
correct?
does. Yes, it does.
So where do you begin?
So I always say this, okay, because resources are very limiting. You know, if your loved one doesn't have a lot of funds, hiring help, caregiver, like hiring professional caregivers can
Right.
be extremely expensive. And so it's important to see what kind of resources are available in your local area, depending
Mhm.
on how old your loved one is. If they're elderly, you definitely want to explore a resource through the Department of Aging. If you're dealing with a
Ah,
specific diagnosis like Alzheimer's or dementia, there's specific groups, and even like there's a Parkinson's group. These are national groups that you can
ah,
find local resources for. Cancer, depending on what cancer it is, you can look into see what
Alzheimer's,
type
I'm
of
sure.
cancer the person has. There's different organizations that you can tap into. I always say start locally first. Look into
Okay.
your local resources. When it's an older person, Department of Aging definitely comes across first. Secondly, if it's a specific illness that you're dealing with, or chronic disease, you definitely want to look and see if there's some sort of association that's attached, that maybe you
Mhm.
can find some support that way.
Mhm.
And then kind of growing from there. I will say, I feel like there's no quick, easy resource to say, okay, this is where you go for all information. It just doesn't exist, at least not in my experience. And that's a challenge. And that's something I always have to tell. I feel like I call myself the Grim Reaper because I feel like I have to always tell people like bad news, bad news. No, 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 I don't have this resource. I don't have this. But yeah, caregiving is just really challenging. But I feel like if we have more of these conversations, people
Yeah.
will be more aware of it and wanna like create resources and support.
Yeah, I know you yourself have a platform. I constantly see your Instagram posts with wonderful, very sensitive, heart sensitive tips regarding elderly care and caregiving and things of that nature, between IG and your podcast. I What you're seeing on the screen, by the way, is misguidednotions.com.
Mhm.
What do you talk about on your website? What do you talk about on your website?
So I try to create resources to help people who are taking care of their loved ones to really just have some sort of resource and guidance. It's more of like a guidance, hence the word misguided, because I feel like there's so much misinformation. So if there's a
Of
place where you
course.
can get all the information to try to help you be your best possible advocate, whether it's for you or your loved one, I think is just would make your healthcare experience a lot better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think so that's really where where I go with my website. I talk about a lot of different things, but it really focuses in the health and wellness space. And especially now that we're in this pandemic and all that has happened, I'm really big on self care and just finding out ways to prioritize our health and wellness because it's so important with all of these unprecedented times that we're going through right now.
Right, right. So I will say, because I've been on your website a couple times. Uh-huh.
Aw,
I've definitely been on the website, and I'm so glad that you mentioned the specific websites when it comes to aging. Um, Taking advantage of those local resources. I always tell people, look, we just had an election. It's those local things that you voted on that affect you the most,
yes.
and the federal help that comes with that is affected by what you vote on. So,
Very true.
um, so when you talk about Department of Aging and all of these things, that stuff that is there is there,
Right.
that I don't think people talk about or discuss enough. So tapping into that resource is huge. Thank you so much for mentioning that.
Sure.
Um, Not being afraid to go to those specific websites and departments when it comes to specific diseases. I mean, like I said, I have an aunt that's dealing with a husband with Alzheimer's. And look, there's a
Free
whole
and free. Free resources.
wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's super important. That's super important. These are resources you're talking about when it comes to the disease itself or for caregivers as well. Because I know the Caregivers Alliance
It's
is
both.
also for both.
Yeah, it's both. It's both. Yeah, and they'll link you accordingly. So like a lot of these organizations like Alzheimer's Association for one, they are 24/7. They operate all the time and they're a national, is it, would it be considered national? Yeah, national
I
database
think
of resources that's available to you. So you can speak to a person on the phone and they'll try to link you as much as possible. And they'll even go the step further in setting up a call with one of their specialists to help you navigate and see what it is that you can most
that's
benefit from.
huge.
Yes,
That's huge.
it is. And believe it or not, in talking with many of these different organizations, people don't utilize them enough. They don't. And I'm telling you, they're there. Especially now that
Wow.
a lot of things have gone digital, the virtual space has really opened up a lot of doors for people.
Yeah. The access.
Yes,
All of a
exactly.
sudden now you have access
Exactly.
that
Exactly.
you did not easily have before.
Exactly.
When it took writing a letter, putting it in the mail, and hoping that it actually gets there, and you receiving something from them to just
Right.
get the ball rolling.
Absolutely. And it's not going to be an easy fix, I feel like,
Of
just
course
to
not.
find the help that you need per se. But it's just, I feel like just having that guide, like someone to kind of steer you in the right direction, really does help a lot. And it helps alleviate a lot of the
Yeah.
stress that comes along with caregiving for sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. With that in mind, I feel like I think I definitely want to talk to you again.
Yes.
um,
Anytime.
Sometime for sure. Because when you think about everything that comes along with it, I definitely want to have a separate conversation regarding mental health. The mental health is caregivers. But in regards to that, just to close us out, I think it's important just to remember it's okay to take a break. It's okay to take a break. And whatever that break looks like for you, take it, because you're no good to anyone else if you're not good to yourself, right? Sandrine, thank you so much for taking the time out of everything that you have going on to talk to someone 3,000 miles away.
I loved it. Thank you. Anytime. I'd love to do this again.
For sure, for sure, for sure. And we will. So thank you. Hang out for just a
Yes,
second.
sure.
So, you guys, caregiving is a huge issue. November is National Family Caregivers Month. And if you are not a caregiver, I really, really encourage you, if you know someone who is, please give them a call during this time, send them a text message during this time, offer a couple hours, whether it's subbing for them, whether it's taking them out for a couple hours, whether it's doing a task. Please just reach out and say, hey, what can I do? To be honest with you, that's the Christmas gift. That's the holiday gift that they will probably appreciate more than a sweater. So reach out to a caregiver, give them a call, text, email. In the meantime, this conversation is going to be posted on the 17th. If you are listening to it already, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have heard something that has liberated you in some way. So until our next conversation, peace, stay cool, and God bless.